in Genesis chapter 47, and we're continuing on with the story of Israel coming into Egypt, and this is really where they meet up with Pharaoh, and they're given a portion of the land to take their flocks and their herds, and that they're going to settle in there in Egypt. And this is a big deal. When they're coming in here, they are leaving Canaan for the last time. The next time they come into Canaan, they're going to be taking it over. It's hundreds of years later, right? But it's close to 500 years later that they're actually going to come back into Canaan and actually take it over, and it'll be their possession. So we already kind of covered that as far as the promise of them going in and coming back out. But starting there in verse 1, the first thing that we see here is that they're talking about how they want to sojourn in Egypt. And so in verse 1 it says, "Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, 'My father and my brethren, and their flocks and their herds, and all that they have, are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen.' And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, Thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come. For thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen.'" So they come in and they tell them that they are shepherds, and this is something that Joseph already said. He said, "Hey, Pharaoh is gonna put you in Goshen," and knowing that shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians and all this stuff. So Joseph already knew what was going to happen, but this is what he basically told them what to say and all this other stuff. So, but notice that they're sojourning there. And I know they've been sojourning in the land of Canaan for this the time with Abraham coming out of his own country, and since Genesis 12, they've been sojourning in a land that's not theirs. But go to Hebrews chapter 11, because really this shows you that, hey, they're sojourning there, but they're not planning on staying there. At least that's the idea, is that they're not staying there. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, especially when you're dealing with Egypt. So Egypt in the Bible is a lot of times, it's called the iron furnace. Egypt a lot of times is likened unto the world. And so what we have to realize as Christians is that we're just passing through, that we're just sojourning here. This isn't our home, and we need to remember that. So Hebrews chapter 11, I know I hit this before in other sermons and stuff like that, so I don't want to belabor this, but Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, it says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." Now, this is talking about obviously where he's in the land of promise, that Canaan. So they're coming out of that, going into Egypt. And so, but it's still a strange place, right? If Canaan, the land of promise that's promised to them, is a strange place, Egypt's even more strange. And down in verse 13, talking about all these people that have died. So at this point, Abraham and Isaac are both dead. And Jacob's going to die, and Joseph's going to die. They're all going to die in Egypt. So none of them are going to make it into the promised land where that promise is coming. And so that's what it's saying here in verse 13. It says, "These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country." Notice verse 16, "But now they desire a better country, that is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city." And so in the Old Testament, it's very clear that they saw these things afar off. And we talked about this with the seed, the fact that the promise was given to Abraham and to his seed. That seed is Christ. And they were fully persuaded. Abraham was fully persuaded that what he had promised, he was able also to perform. And it wasn't just Abraham that was persuaded of that. So it's stating that all these people died in faith. So when you're reading Hebrews chapter 11, at this point you've gone from Abel down, and they're stating the fact that these all died in faith, not having received the promises yet. And even at the very end of Hebrews chapter 11, it's talking about how they they hadn't received the promises, but they had a good report, through faith. And so what I see here is the fact that Abraham by faith sojourned, not knowing where he went. And when we're here down on the earth, what we're doing is we're walking by faith, not by sight. And we're walking in a strange land. Okay, so that's the way you have to view it. And especially when I get into the end of this sermon, which I'm going to be dealing with taxes and bondage, okay, because I'm going to be getting into more of the, just the world we live in today, in America. And you can get caught up, you can get depressed when you think about everything that's going on in this world. But you have to have this mentality of that, it's not ours, And, just recently we paid off our property where we have property out in Bannington, and that's great. I'm all for that. But in the end, you got to look at that as like, hey, that's not permanent. It's great to have property, and I'm all for having property and having a house and all this stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to get to that as well. But at the same time, what you have to realize is that all this stuff is temporary. It's all going to be melted with fervent heat. And when you have that mindset of, hey, this stuff's, it's just temporary, it's not going to last, then you're not going to get all uptight and upset and just like losing sleep when the government's saying, hey, we're going to add more taxes on there. Now, I'm against it, and I'm not saying that you should be like, yeah, give me more taxes, and all this other stuff. But at the same time, you need to be thinking, hey, I'm just getting through. The Lord's going to provide, and let their money perish with them. I'm not worried about the things that I have in this life, the house that I have, the car that I have. As long as I'm making ends meet, I'm providing for my family, and we're getting by, that's all that really matters. And so, but go to 1 Peter chapter 2, because people would say, well, this is just talking about the Jews. This is just talking about the promises to the Israelites and all this other stuff. First of all, at this point, when you're looking at this, you're dealing with these are all like not the tribes of Israel. When you're looking in Hebrews chapter 11, you're dealing with everybody before that. But in 1 Peter chapter 2, it's very clear that who he's talking to here is actually not Israelites. Okay, the whole book starts off with the fact that he's talking to strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And so in 1 Peter chapter 2, it even clarifies it even more, because in verse 9 it says, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. I think we've established we're not talking about the Israelites, right? Because these are people that were in time past not a people. And so now they are, because in the New Testament, it's neither Jew nor Greek. We're of that holy nation, right? You don't have to be circumcised to be a part of it. You don't have to go to the temple to be a part of it. It's all believers. Notice verse 11. It says, dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. And so you got to have this mentality. Back then it was the same way with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all their progenitors, is the fact that we're just passing through. David had that same mentality, and the fact that he knew that he was going to dwell in the house of the Lord forever, and that this life isn't the end. That'd be pretty depressing if it was. If this is it, if this is the only moment to really shine, or this is the moment that it's just all worth it, this is nothing compared to eternity. But what you have to realize is that you do have a short period of time to do things for Christ, though, to do the eternal values. And so we just had to have this mindset that we're sojourning. And so you want to almost get into the mindset of like the children of Israel going into Egypt and sojourning there. It's not their home. And it's kind of like you have this, you've been given a piece of property just to kind of live on and survive on. And you got to look at it that way. Because the problem is, and especially within Christianity, is people get way too attached to material things. They get attached, and then that gets them out of the things of God. Whether it's property, a house, a car, it could be anything, but material things, being choked by the cares of this life. And we need to have this mentality of, we have things, there's nothing wrong with having things, but at the same time, we don't live for those things. that we're not attached to them. If I lost my truck tonight, it would be an inconvenience to be down to one vehicle, but I'm not that. I won't be like just distraught. I'm just like crying over it, and just I'd be just like, whatever, we'll figure out something, right? Or if we lost my wife's car or the house or something like that. As long as, my family's okay and, they're safe and all that stuff, that's all that really matters to me. And yes, all that would be an inconvenience. I'm not saying I want to lose that stuff and have to figure out what we're going to do after that. But you don't want to get attached to it to where like, man, that would just be horrible if I lost that item. And put in the blank what that would be. Okay, if you have an item that you're just like, I would be like just in mourning if I lost this material item, that's a problem. Okay, and I'm not saying, well, are you saying, Pastor, we should just go live out on the street when it's like 20 degrees outside? That's not what I'm talking about. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should just be out on the street or not worry about being on the street. God will take care of you if anything like that happened. But you shouldn't be so attached to things. Having food and raiment, let us be there with content. And that's the attitude we need to have. And so going into this, as far as they're going into a strange land and they're sojourning there, that's a good thing, honestly. I think about the fact of, I don't want to have a lot of money, to be honest. I like having financial security. Now, that's not a bad thing. Right? I don't think people should be foolish with their money to where they can't pay the bills and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of good to just kind of live within your means, paying the bills. You're not really worried about that type of stuff. But I don't want to be rich either, because I don't want to have that tendency to really get into material things or even worry about having a whole bunch of material things. I'd rather have a more minimalist type of life when it comes to that type of stuff. It's just easier. It's simpler. And so, go back to Genesis chapter 47, and there's something interesting that Pharaoh says to Joseph and about his brethren and stuff like that, dealing with this, because I picture this passage as kind of like going into the world and going into the workforce, so to speak, and working and trying to live in the world, and eventually we're not going to be there anymore. We're going to go into the promised land once we die or Jesus comes back. But in Genesis chapter 47, verse 5, it says, And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. If thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. So this is something that I believe as Christians, when you're in a world, and obviously I don't believe Pharaoh's probably saved here, so you're dealing with a world that's unsaved that you're in, and your employer is probably not going to be saved. A lot of the people that are above him or clients that you're dealing with are not going to be saved. But you want to be a man of activity. Okay, I'm particularly speaking to the men, because obviously we're supposed to be the breadwinners. We're supposed to be taking care of the basically bringing home the bacon, right? But we need to be men of activity in this world. We don't need to be of the world. We need to be outside the world, as far as we're not of the pleasures and the sin and all the corruption that's in the world. But it doesn't mean that we can't work honest work and be men of activity. And notice Pharaoh is basically saying, hey, if there's any men there that you have that are men of activity, meaning that there's some hard workers, some men that know how to do a good job, bring them my way and have them over my cattle. And so we as Christians need to set that mark, because, the world is always looking down on Christians as far as, we're not intelligent, or, there's always a kind of a bad taste when it comes to especially fundamental Christians, because we try to live this separated life, and it's kind of like when you go out to eat let's say you go out to eat with your company, or you're with coworkers or something like that, and they're like, hey, you want to drink a beer, and be like, no, I don't drink. You don't say it like that, but you're just like, no, I don't drink. They automatically look down and be like, what? You too good? You goody two shoes? Like they automatically kind of have their nose up to you a little bit, because you're trying to live a clean, righteous life. And so bypassing that, if you're a really good worker, they'll respect you for that. So if you're a really good worker and they're like, this guy comes in early, leaves late, he does a great job, he's efficient in what he does, I don't want to lose him as a worker, then when you say, hey, I don't drink, they're going to be like, yeah, that's great. They're probably not even going to give you a hard time about it if you're a really good worker, because they want to keep you around. They probably don't want you to get upset at them or anything like that. And so Titus chapter 3, you don't have to turn there, but Titus 3:1, it says, put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Okay? And so we talked about this. Remember, we were talking about a God-ordained government and the fact that God does ordain a government, not like our government, not a government that just tells you what to eat and drink and tries to rule your life. That's not the government of the Bible. But the government that's supposed to be the punishment of evildoers, we're supposed to obey them, meaning like don't steal, murder, stuff like that. And so we're supposed to obey the magistrates when it comes to that type of stuff. And it says to be ready to every good work. In Nehemiah, when they were building the wall, it says for the people had a mind to work in Nehemiah chapter 4. And so we need to have that as Christians, because going into the world, we're kind of going in, on a low scale to the world. Does that make sense? Because we're going in there as fundamental Christians. Not just Christians, because I would say in America, especially in West Virginia, a lot of people claim to be Christian. Okay, so if you're in the workforce right now, it's not like you're the black sheep. If you're like, hey, I celebrate Christmas, you're like, who's this guy? Most people celebrate Christmas. In America, it's still a national holiday that most people get off for Christmas, unless you have like Ebenezer Scrooge as an employer. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's like a national holiday that most everybody gets off, except for if you work in the hospitals or some people have to work it. But all that to say is that you're not. I'm not talking about the person that claims to be a Christian. I'm talking about the person that says, hey, I can't go to work on Wednesday night because I have church, or I can't work on Sundays because I have church. And that's going to be, do you see how you're automatically in a job and they know, hey, this person can't work on these certain days? You're already inconveniencing them. Okay, I'll say that loosely, because it was back in the day, it was just known that people didn't work on Sunday because of church. But all that to say is that you're kind of going in there with some marks against you, so to speak. So if you're a really hard worker, though, that's all going to turn around to where they're going to look at you and say, hey, I'm going to put this person in this position in charge, even though they can't work in these certain times, but they're consistent, they're hard workers, they're here on time, they're not late, they do their job, and they don't complain. And so we need to be a man of activity, not slothful. Okay, there's enough slothful people in the world, and especially as a Christian, because if you're claiming the name of Christ and then you're just this slothful, lazy worker, what do you think that makes Christianity look like? You're like, oh, I don't want to hire one of these fundamental Christians. They're just a lazy slob. They don't do a good job. They're pretty much just stealing time. And Titus 2 talks about that too. But go to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. Because I think people get this confused when it comes to the fact that come out from among them and be ye separate, said the Lord. Right? But at the same time, Jesus prayed and said, I don't take them out of the world, but keep them from the evil. So we're spiritually supposed to be out of the world, but physically we're in it. Does that make sense? And so spiritually speaking, you need to be out of the world, you need to not be of the world, but we are in the world. And we can't change that. We're not going to go live on a convent somewhere and drink the Kool-Aid. So we have to be in the world to go preach the gospel. We have to be in the world to be an influence on this world. And so we're strangers and pilgrims, but we need to have a good conversation in the world, that they may behold our good works, that they may glorify God in the day of visitation, as it says in 1 Peter. But in Luke chapter 16, this is an interesting passage, because when you read this, you're kind of like, what is this talking about? It seems like it contradicts a little bit when you're looking at it. But in Luke 16, verse 9, it says, I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. That verse right there, you probably look at that, and listen, we've probably all looked at it and be like, what is that talking about? Because it says to be friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. Whenever you think of mammon, you think that's not a good thing. Now, mammon, I believe, is just money. Okay, it's just another word for money. But when it says the mammon, being friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, I believe what you're dealing with is you're friends with people that have money that are unsaved. Okay, meaning like employers, people that you'd work for. But notice as in the everlasting habitations isn't talking about heaven. It's just, everlasting isn't always talking about everlasting life or heaven or hell and stuff like that, okay? And so what this is talking about is that, when you fall in this world, there could be worldly people that can help you out. Does that make sense? Not every single person that helps you out is a saved fundamental Baptist. And that happens a lot where there's just worldly people. But, this goes into the Calvinist stuff, this total depravity, where, people believe that, these Calvinists believe that unsaved people are just like, they just can't do anything good. That is such a lie. It's against the Bible. Romans chapter 2 teaches against that, and the fact that they do by nature the things that are contained in the law because it's written in their conscience. But I believe this is what it's talking about. Going on with verse 10 there, it says, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, this is where you'd say, well, man, didn't he just say to make friends with the mammon of unrighteousness? He didn't say to serve mammon, though. Serving somebody that's unrighteous, meaning like an unsaved person that has mammon, is different than serving mammon, meaning serving money. Serving money is loving money, right? The love of money is the root of all evil. I don't go to work. I don't serve money. I don't work for money, meaning like to just have a lot of money. I work to provide for my family, and money answereth all things, according to Ecclesiastes. So money is just a means to the end, right? I need money because I need food for my family. I need to pay the rent, or the mortgage or whatever. I need to pay the bills. And so I'm not working for money. And you've probably known those people that do. Those people that just go to work and it's all about the money. That's all they care about. They just want to have a whole bunch of money. And why do they want to have a bunch of money? To have a whole bunch of things they don't need. But if you're working for, let's say the unsaved of this world that have mammon, that have money, and you're a good worker, you're a good steward for that person, then when you fall or you fail, that person's going to take care of you. That's what this passage is teaching. But I believe the Lord Jesus is also, like, if you're getting confused on that, he's not saying to serve money, right? Because he kind of ends it with, you can't serve God and mammon. So he's not saying to go out and just work for money, live for money. He's just making a point that, hey, while we're in this world, we need to work in the world. We need to work for people that aren't saved. And so there's maybe a mentality out there is like, well, is it wrong for me to work for someone that's not saved? Should I only work for Christians? I usually get the question a lot about, like, what if there's a reprobate in the office or something like that? Obviously, if there's a job where it's just full, let's say you're like, I want to go into hairdressing and you're a man, that's probably not the position to go into, okay? When it comes to, not wanting to be around reprobates, if it's like, I'm going to go to an all-men's salon, not the place for you. But I'll say this, obviously if there was a reprobate, you need to try to distance yourself as much as possible. If it is something that's affecting, like the fact that that person is, you just can't handle it, then you need to find a different job. But barring reprobates, when it comes to work, we're going to be around unsaved people. You may be around people that are just crass type of people, especially if you work in construction. If you work in construction, you're going to be around people that cuss. You're going to be around people that are just not walking in the light. Okay, but go to Colossians chapter 3, because what it comes down to is, well, how do you reconcile? It says, you cannot serve God and mammon, because when you're serving, let's say, an unsaved employee or employer, you're supposed to be serving them as unto the Lord. Okay, so that's how you're not serving mammon. Now, if you're serving your employer and you're serving because you want to have the big boat, you want to have the RV, and you want to have all these nice things, that's not the right reason. You need to be serving them because you want to serve God. And here's the thing, when I work, a lot of times, don't get me wrong, I want to make a good impression on the client. I want to be a good worker because I want to be able to make money for the company so the company grows, so that I have a job. Okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with capitalism and the fact of making profit, making money, and growing a company and doing all that stuff. I'm not against that. But when it comes to what the Bible teaches on this, a lot of times you're working hard because you want to make a good impression on the employer so that they see the kind of person you are, and that reflects on who Jesus is, meaning that you're taking the name of Jesus with you. And I think we need to realize that when we're in the world, is that when you call yourself a Christian, don't take that lightly, because people are looking at you and they're judging you as that Christian. The moment you fall or you make a mistake, they're going to be like, I thought you were a Christian. You could be living the cleanest life, and you're just like, oh, there goes the Christian, Like, they don't really look at it like, oh, that's a good thing, or they don't give you accolades all the time for being a good Christian or whatever. As soon as you fall, though, as soon as you make a mistake, let's say you slipped up and said a cuss word, it'd be like, I thought you were a Christian, and so they're looking at you, they're watching you, they're watching to see, hey, is this person really who he or she says she is? And the fact is that they're watching to see if that's who you are, if that's what you really believe. And they can see that, especially when you go out soul winning. They can see whether you really believe that or not. And I've definitely had people where I've won people to Christ and they're like, I know you believe this. I can just tell that's what you believe. And people that I've worked with for years, there's no doubt in their mind that they know I'm not joking around when I'm talking about Christianity. Like, they know that it's not a joke. Like, I'm not just playing church. I'm not just playing a Christian. And so when I talk about the Bible, guess what? They take me seriously when I talk about the Bible. And so, but in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22, it says, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord you shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. So over and over again in the New Testament, when it talks about serving a master, and I'm not talking about slave-master relationship. I'm talking about an employer is your master when it comes to that they're holding your paycheck and you're working for it, right? And so that's what I would apply servants and masters to, is just a job. And so you don't have to be an indentured servant, for this apply. But Titus says the same kind of thing. It says, exhort servants in chapter 2, exhort servants to be obedient unto their own masters and to please them well in all things, not answering again, not purloining, but showing all good fidelity, that they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior in all things. Now, who's the they applying to? I believe it's talking about the masters, meaning that they're going to see this. They're going to see your good fidelity. Now, what's good fidelity? Faithfulness. You think of an infidel. What's the opposite of an infidel? A fidel, right? But not purloining. What's purloining? It means to steal. Think about like stealing time. Let's say you put on that I did this for 8 hours and you really didn't do it for 8 hours, kind of thing. That's kind of you're stealing and lying about what you did do or what you didn't do. So anyway, that's what when I see the children of Israel going in there and the brethren going in there, and their occupation is shepherds, and Pharaoh says, if you have any men of activity, put them over my flocks. And so we need to have that good, look at Joseph. Joseph has this great rapport with Pharaoh. And he's wanting to know if any of his other brothers had that same kind of mentality, that same kind of work ethic. And, that's going to speak volumes when it comes to, you think of Daniel and his friends and all this stuff. This is not just here where that kind of stuff can have a huge influence on people that are higher up that aren't even saved. And they look at that and say, you know what? You know, you think about like persecution happens. You know, they come against the church and they start, you know, saying, hey, you know, this guy, Jason Robinson, you know, he hates the fags. And, you know, I think that you should get rid of that guy. You know, when they come to you with that and they take that to your employer, but then your employer knows, hey, this guy is the best worker I know. Anytime I've ever been around him, he's been very polite, he's been nice, he's never like this jerk or, you know, and all this stuff. They're going to go tell that guy to pound salt. But if you're not a good worker, you're not a man of activity, and you know you're just a a liability at work, and then that report comes from the outside world, it'd be kind of like if someone came up to Pharaoh right now and said, Joseph is, you know, did you know what he believes? You know, let's say Joseph obviously believes the Bible, right? What if he said, you know, praise God for Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed? And let's say, you know, in Egypt, they're just like a bunch of sodomite lovers. And then they took that to Pharaoh. They took that to Pharaoh and said, you know what, he hates sodomites. What do you think Pharaoh's going to say to that? He's going to be like, go pound salt, you know, this is my right-hand man. He saved us from, you know, of dying. And, you know, you foretold of this famine. So that's what I'm talking about with being in the world, but also making friends with the mammon of unrighteousness. It's not saying making friends with money or making friends with or serving money. It's just the fact that, hey, when we're in this world, we need to live in the world and be nice to and work hard and have that good influence as far as being Christians. Now, going back to Genesis chapter 47, Jacob meets Pharaoh, and he says kind of the same thing. We're talking about the sojourning, but he also talks about the fact that in verse 9, or starting in verse 7, it says, and Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil hath the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and went out from before Pharaoh. And so notice the term pilgrimage. So we're strangers and pilgrims. They're coming, the brethren are coming in to sojourn. And so the attitude of Jacob is, I'm just passing through. I'm just a pilgrim. My fathers were just pilgrims, you know, and I'm not talking about pilgrims and Indians, you know, but I'm just talking about the fact that we're just here for a temporary time. And, you know, this is obviously a great place when we were talking about the age of the earth, calculating the age of the earth. If you remember, to the day, it was 430 years when they went in to when they came out. And we know Jacob's exact how old he is. So that's how we figured that out. This is one of those places. But he also blesses Pharaoh. So that's interesting. It's not always wrong, you know, to bless someone that's unsaved. And again, I don't really know if Pharaoh's saved. Doesn't really say. But, you know, sometimes when I'm out soul winning, a lot of times, as long as they're not a reprobate, if I give someone the gospel, for example, or if I invite them to church and they're just not interested or something like that, I'll usually say, well, you know, God bless you, have a good day. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? And so Jacob blesses Pharaoh, but you got to understand that Pharaoh's doing a lot for him too. Pharaoh's like bringing his whole family in and letting them stay in Goshen. And so we don't want to have this mentality that, hey, we only want God to bless the saved. Now, yeah, I would say specifically the saved. It's kind of like, you know, to do good, especially unto the household of faith. You know, we definitely need to, we have a hierarchy of, you know, taking care of the brethren. But at the same time, if that were the hierarchy, then we wouldn't go out soul winning. And as far as like we don't care about the unsaved at all, we don't want to bless the unsaved at all. By going to their doorstep and giving them the gospel, do you know that you're blessing them? That you're doing something good for them? And, you know, and more so your enemies, right? The Bible talks about to love your enemies, to do good unto them that persecute you and despitefully use you. And because, you know, it's a lot easier to do good things to people that love you and know you, and they're going to do things back for you and stuff like that. But Joseph here takes care of his family. In verse 11, so if you're back in Genesis 47, verse 11, it says, and Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded, and Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. And so we see that Joseph takes care of his family. Obviously, he has the ability to do this, but this is a great principle in the Bible. The Bible says I put Titus. That's definitely not Titus. There's no chapter 5 in Titus. But 1 Timothy chapter 5, it talks about, it says, but if any provide not for his own, especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. So we need to provide for our own. And actually, you say, well, that's just talking about the husband providing for his family. Actually, in context, that's talking about the fact of a woman being a widow and her children or her family of some sort needs to take care of her, because it's talking about the fact that the church will support widows that are widows indeed. They have to be over 60, and they have to have no family that's going to take care of them. And he's making a point saying, hey, if you don't provide for your own, especially those of your own house, meaning that they're family, then you've denied the faith and you're worse than an infidel. It doesn't say you are an infidel. It's just saying you're worse than an infidel, meaning that you're worse than an unbeliever when it comes to taking care of your family. And so Joseph does the right thing. He's the son, but he's taking care of his father, and he's taking care of all his older brethren, and obviously his younger brother as well. 1 John 3 talks about this. 1 John 3 and 17. It says, but whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? My children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And so we need to not shut up our bowels of compassion, especially with family members, and when we're speaking spiritually here with the brethren. When it comes to the brethren at large, you should have a special place in your heart to say, hey, we need to take care of the brethren. But how much more in the local church? When it comes to, if there's brothers and sisters in Christ that I want to take care of more than anybody, it's those that are of this church right here. Does that mean that I'm not going to try to take care of people that are outside the church? Of course, there's other people that I would want to take care of and want to help out and all that stuff. But I'll say this, if there was someone struggling in this church or someone that needed my help in this church, I'm going to help them before I help out someone in another church, okay? And sometimes I think this happens in Baptist churches where it's kind of like we throw all this stuff to something that's far away, and we're like, well, we want to help out this, but then everything's falling apart here, and there's a lot of people that need help here. And so I believe we need to take care of the family that's here. And then obviously if everybody's doing great, we're all fine, then yeah, we need to help out as many people as we can. Proverbs 3 verse 27 says, withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in thy power, or in the power of thine hand to do it. So that's the key though, right? Because, when it talks about giving, it's saying, I don't want you to give and some are, eased in your wanting. You don't want to, you say, well, I'm going to help this person. They need $500 and you don't have $500. That's not smart, okay? As far as like giving stuff that you don't have. But if you have the power, meaning let's say you just had $500 that you're just like, yeah, we paid all the bills. We have extra money. We don't really have to have it just in savings or something like that. And you say, hey, we want to help them out. That's what it's talking about. But if you're just like scraping the barrel and like, if you're like your family's going to be eating beans and rice for the whole week because you're giving someone $500, that's where God bless you if you did it. Okay, I'm not saying like I'm not against you, and I think God will bless you if you did that. But I don't believe God expects that. I don't believe He expects us to go that extreme. Now, go back to Genesis chapter 41, and really this is kind of what I wanted to get into in the sermon, is really what we get into with Joseph and the Egyptians. And I believe actually when you're looking at this, if you remember, Joseph and his brethren, they had this whole thing where they're going back and forth for these 2 years of the famine. This very well could be kind of backtracking, just dealing with the Egyptians. So you kind of like heard the story about him and his brethren. He's kind of going back now. Now we're dealing with how he dealt with the Egyptians themselves when it came to this famine. And so in verse 47, verse 13. So Genesis 47 and verse 13, it says, "And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house." So what you have to understand is that he's selling this back to the Egyptians. Now, if you go back to Genesis 41, he got this corn from Egypt, meaning that the people that farmed it and put it into the ground, I don't believe, it says throughout the whole land, okay? So this was the corn of the people of Egypt that he's selling back to them, okay? So in verse 47 of chapter 41, it says, "And in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls, and he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for it was without number." Now, it doesn't say that he paid them for it. Now, maybe he did, and it just doesn't say that in the Bible. But I don't see that where he said, "Hey, I'm going to pay you for the excess that you have," or anything like that. I think what happened probably is that there was so much abundance that they didn't really, they're just like, whatever, we can't eat all this. So he just took all the corn that was just excess anyway. But what I want to say with this is that the fact that this is what government is like. The government takes what's yours and then they sell it back to you. Pretty much. That's what you're dealing with the government. They take what's yours and then they sell it back to you, usually with interest, And so it's kind of like someone taking or stealing something from you and then saying, "Hey," it's kind of like if someone stole your car and said, "Hey, I'll sell it back to you. I'll give you a good deal on it, I'll sell it back to you." And you're just like, "Wait a minute, it was mine to begin with. Why are you selling it back to me?" And so that's what I see here. So first of all, what happens is that they basically use up all their money. So they have a bunch of money, and they spend all their money, and Joseph takes all that money and puts it in Pharaoh's house. Then notice in verse 15 it says, "And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, Give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence, for the money faileth? And Joseph said, Give your cattle, and I will give you of your cattle if money fail. And they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses, and for the flocks, and for the cattle, and for the herds, and for the asses, and he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year." So now they're giving up all their substance. So they had money. You can think gold, silver, and whatever they had as far as what they used for money. They gave all that out. Now they need more corn. They're like, "Well, just take all our herds." So this is their substance. If you think, back then, that's what, a cow, they would trade that for different things and, exchange it for money. So those things are worth a lot. And now, so they're pretty much down to whatever they have as far as their house and their property. And what happens here in this chapter is they sell themselves to the government. They sell themselves to the government. And this is like reading the newspaper when it comes to what America has done, where they've sold themselves to the government. And, I'm not going to get too technical when I get into this, but I do want to talk about taxes a little bit and talk about the fact of what Jesus says about taxes, but also just the fact of what our government really is. And I preached that sermon about God-ordained government on Sunday because I didn't want, I knew I was going to be getting in this to be like, Pastor Robinson is like an anarchist, he's against government, and I don't want you to think that I'm like that far, okay? But I'll say this, taxation is theft, and taxation is equal to bondage, according to this chapter. We're going to get into that. And so you say, "Oh, it's the land of the free." Yeah, when I get through this, you'll see that according to the Bible, we're not free. According to Jesus, we're not free. People, you could say that all you want, but it's this fantasy realm as far as the fact that we are sold to the government, meaning that our land is sold to the government, Our property is sold to the government. Everything that we have is sold to the government. And the government just pretty much gives us, what they deem best. And so when it comes to think about your payroll tax. Your payroll. I'm going to get into that, but think about this. What if the government just said, hey, income tax is going to be 50%? And, could you really stop it? Are you going to stop the federal government from doing that? They're like, oh, we'll elect somebody. Yeah, that's worked out so far, hasn't it? That's working out real well. And so, tell that to Joseph and Pharaoh here. And so, I believe Egypt was more of probably like kind of a republic type. I don't think it was this strong dictatorship, but that's what that turned into. And you can actually see how how the end times is going to be too. Because if you remember, in those seals, what is some of the things dealing with the beginning of sorrows? What are you dealing with? Famine. Famine and pestilence. How do you think that they're going to get everybody to go to one world currency and to put their trust in one man? Think about it. You have this famine, no one can eat, and they're just saying, hey, give us your liberty and we'll take care of you. We'll give you food. We'll give you means. And everybody's just like, here you go. And they thank him for it in this chapter. They say, you've saved us. And that's what's crazy about it, is that people thank the government. Thank you. Thank you for taking away my freedoms. Thank you for putting me into bondage. And it's crazy because you look at this and you say, that corn was theirs to begin with. What should have really happened is that Joseph, they should have all had the corn in excess and stored it up, and then they could have sold it because obviously they have enough to where they can sell it to strangers. They could have sold it, and guess what? The whole country could have been more prosperous off of all the strangers of the land. That's the way it should be. But no, all the money is being pumped into the government, with the government just wasting it, throwing it off to all kinds of foreign aid and all this stuff, and we see nothing. When they had those bailouts, I know I'm getting way too when they had those bailouts and they bailed out GM and all that stuff, all the people that actually worked for GM didn't get a dime of that. And they bail out all these companies. It's all this corrupt corporate capitalism, and it's just, and I love capitalism, but this corrupt corporate capitalism where the government's in bed with all these companies and they're just taking all your money, that was taxpayer dollars that went to GM, that went to General Motors, and they're closing down facilities now or whatever, and so be it. Let them go into the bankruptcy. They've already taken a whole bunch of America's dollars as it is, and then they put your dollars in there, and then when you go down to GM, do you think you get a discount for that? Do you think they're like, oh, that some of this was actually your money that made this car right here, it made this truck right here? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Go to Genesis 47 and verse 18. Genesis 47, verse 18. Listen, our country, we haven't been free since probably the beginning of the 1900s. Since 1913, since the income tax was started. Which was only supposed to be on the 1% rich. Oh, how's that turning out? Who here is paying income tax? Every single person in here. And so any person that's working anyway. Anyway, Genesis 47, we're going to get to it. Verse 18. It says, when that year was ended, they came unto him the second year, and said unto him, we will not hide it from my Lord, how that our money is spent. My Lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my Lord, but our bodies and our lands. Wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, we and our land with the servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed, that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field, because the famine prevailed over them. So the land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt, even to the other end thereof. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them, wherefore they sold not their lands. They sold themselves to the government for bread. That's what happens here. And everybody, everybody would say, well, Joseph, he never did anything bad. There's nothing in the Bible about Joseph doing something bad. I believe this was bad. I believe that this is a corruption and stealing from people and putting them in the bondage. And, would anybody doubt when it says that they're selling themselves and he bought them, that's not bondage? Because when I get into how much tax they put on them, I want you to think about this. He puts a 20% tax on their increase. And what is that? Income. 20% income tax is what he puts on them, and they're in bondage. They sold themselves, their property and themselves, to Egypt, and he put a 20% income tax. You don't believe me? Look at verse 23. It says, Then Joseph said unto the people, Behold, I have bought you this day and your land from Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the 5th part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own, for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for food for your little ones. And they said, Thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh's. Do you know what a 5th part is? 20%. 20%. God asked 10%. They're taking 20%. Now, obviously, depending on how much you make, that percentage as far as federal income tax can vary. Actually, the more you make, the more they take. Now, that's true in percentages anyway, right? If 20% of $2,000 isn't as much as 20% of $200,000, but they increase. It's what's the word? I'm missing the word that basically describes what that means. But it basically, depending on what bracket you're in, if you make more money, it'd be kind of like if you made, let's say you made $90,000 and then you made $110,000, you may actually make less money making $110,000 because of the bracket you got into. And I have no idea what the brackets, I was kind of looking at it a little bit, but I was looking at my paycheck, and I'm not going to tell you what I make or anything like that, but when I was looking at my paycheck and what's deducted, it's more than 20%. Now, you say, well, that's not just federal income tax or state income tax. That's counting Medicare and Social Security. Be like, well, that's not income tax. Well, let me know when I can sign that dotted line that says I don't have to take it out. Because as long as it's forced on me to take it out, I'll consider it a tax. Okay? Because I'll never, well, you'll get Social, yeah, right. The Social Security, I'll never see Social Security. They keep upping the age. It'll be 90 by the time I can take it out. And so, and then the Medicare and all that stuff, I'll probably never see it anyway. But all that to say is that it's over 20%, and you get a bonus or you get something like that, and it's even more they take out. And you're just looking at this thing. It's like I barely got over 50% of what they gave me is what I'm actually taking home. And then when you tithe on it, but I'm all obviously for tithing. Listen, God's 10% is more important than how much they take. And so, but all that to say is that they took 20%, and that was bondage. That was bondage. So tell me again that we're free. When your property, we own our property now, right? But if we don't pay our property tax, guess what? The government takes it. You own your car? Don't pay the registration. See if you can drive it on the road. Because you're paying what? Personal property tax. You pay property tax on dogs. Give me a break. I mean, they are just taxing everything that you have, and you know what it is? It's just them saying, listen, we own you. We own everything that you have. Anything that you have, you're just renting it. And so we're not the land of the free. and since the beginning of the 1900s, when they put in the income tax. They put in the income tax, and you had the property tax. Then they started the Federal Reserve in 1913. Man, it's a coincidence. It all started at one time. And it all started right before we went into the First World War, when it came to the Rothschilds and the Balfour Declaration going into war for what? You know, most people, when you ask them why we went into World War I, they can't tell you. Could you tell me right now why we went into World War I? It's a good question, right? There is an answer. And listen, we're making a documentary about the protocols of Zion and about the wars and the profiteering that comes from it. But the way they got that income tax in and they got that Federal Reserve stuff passed is all why good men slept. You know, they did it during Christmas, I believe. You know, everybody's on vacation, and they just snuck that in there. And they're like, oh, it's only going to be the rich. It's only going to be the rich. 1%. The top 1%. And it was only 1%, by the way. That was the income tax rate, was 1%. And so that's why, you know, they say, well, we need another tax. You know, we need, what's the tax that they want to implement? I forget what it is. But it's like another one on top of sales tax, income tax, property tax. And I'm like, you give them that, it's unlimited. You might as well just write a blank check to say you can just write that as far as you want, as far as how much tax you're going to put on that and how high you're going to make it. And so, anyway, they are in bondage. They are in bondage here, and they're paying a fifth part. They're paying 20%. We pay more than that to the government. Think about this. When you're and those that may own businesses and stuff like that may have run into this. Do you know that your employer pays the same amount of Social Security as you do as an employee? They're literally paying double. Then, when you go out to buy something, guess what? You have to pay tax on that. Do you think that item that they are selling you, that they're just taking a loss on the tax they have to pay on it? No, they are upping the price of the product because of the tax that they have to pay to make it. It's taxes upon taxes. You're getting taxed in, taxed out. You have a death tax. When you die, there's a 50% death tax where they take 50% of whatever loved ones you have, you know, whatever they have, the government takes it. And so, you know, are we living in a free country? Well, go to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17. Let's see what our Savior says about taxes. Now listen, I pay my taxes, okay? But I'll say this, I never thank the government for my refund check. I'll never thank them for that. Like I said, it's like someone stealing $100 from you, giving you back $20, and then you saying, thank you, sir. Thank you for not stealing as much. You know? So, but Matthew chapter 17, I'm going to show you the two passages that are, actually, Matthew 17 is never really brought up, especially when you get into this Fox News Baptist realm. They never bring up Matthew 17. They always bring up Matthew 22, which I'm going to get to. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, right? And so they're just like, oh, pay taxes, you know, we need to pay taxes. Well, let's see what Jesus' mindset is about taxes. Notice in verse 24. So Matthew 17, verse 24, it says, and when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, doth not your master pay tribute? And he said, yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, what thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, of strangers. Notice this, Jesus saith unto them, then are the children free. Now, notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast and hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money, that take and give unto them for me and thee. This is what I believe about taxes, and this is how I deal with taxes. We are not free if we're being taxed by our own government, meaning that this is exactly what happened with the Egyptians. They are citizens of Egypt. It would make more sense to tax Israel and his children because they're strangers. But they're taxing their own citizens. And Jesus said that if you tax the strangers and not the children, meaning the citizens, then are the children free. But what is the reverse of that? If they do pay tribute, they're not free. And so what did our revolution in America start over? I mean, besides obviously there was the warrantless searches and the Fourth Amendment that obviously we have. They were the gun, taking away guns and all that stuff. What was the big thing that everybody remembers? The Tea Party. The Tea Party in Boston, where they threw tea into the harbor. Why? Taxes. Taxes. And taxation without representation is why we went to war. That was one of the big reasons why we seceded from the church, from the Church of England, from England, from King George, And so, but nowadays, it's just like, we need more taxes. I sit in these these think tanks, I'll call it that, where you have people that are around Morgantown, and most of these people don't know anything about economics from a hole in the ground. And listen, I'm not an economics expert, okay? I'm not at all. But from the Bible says that taxation is bondage. Taxation means that you're not free. But yet these same people, when you ask, well, how are we going to pay for the roads to get better? How are we going to pay for this and that? And they'll say, well, we need to add more tax. Tax. Everything increases. Let's add a different tax over here. Let's add a luxury tax over here. Let's add this tax over here. It's like, how about we charge people that actually use the stuff to do it? Right? If you're using that road, maybe there's a toll on that road that you pay so that the maintenance on that road or that thing gets built. And by the way, listen, everybody that comes to Morgantown to come to school out of state, they don't pay taxes in West Virginia. We're paying for them to use those roads. We're paying for them to use all the facilities and all that stuff that we're paying for with our taxes. And so wouldn't it make sense to make the strangers pay for it? And so that's what Jesus teaches about it. But did he say, nuts to them, I'm going to die on this hill while not paying my taxes, okay? No, he said, notwithstanding, lest we should offend them. So my policy is, listen, yes, I know we're not free because we're being taxed by our government, but I pay it. Notwithstanding, lest we offend them. Because I got better things to do than fight the government over taxes. I'm going to go out and win the lost. And I'm just a stranger and pilgrim in this world anyway. So, but go to Matthew 22. This is the last thing I'll show you. Matthew 22. This is the one that's usually brought up. I think Matthew 17 is that's the clear teaching as far as what Jesus taught about taxes and how you should look at it. He paid them, but you understand that you're in bondage if you're having to pay taxes, that you're not really a free people. In Matthew 22 and verse 17, notice what it says. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give unto Caesar or not? What I want you to see here, obviously these are, the scribes and, these people are coming to tempt Jesus. Notice the question, though. Did they say, should we give tribute to Caesar? No, they said, is it lawful? That is a different question. Because what they're asking is it wrong to give to Caesar? That's different than asking, should we give to Caesar, meaning like, do we have to? Does that make sense? That's a totally different question. And that's what most people look at this passage as. They look at it like, someone asks, do we have to give taxes? Do we have to pay taxes? That's not the question that they ask. The question they ask is it lawful, meaning they're asking, is it sinful? Is it against the law? Is it against the law of God to give money to Caesar? And the answer is no. Because he says down here, because obviously they're trying to tempt him. But it says in verse 18, it says, but Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And when they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. Now, there's a whole, obviously you can say, well, everything's God's, so, that's not really Caesar's, anyway. But the question that was asked is it lawful? And obviously they're trying to tempt him, because it's just like when they brought the woman that was caught in adultery, because it wasn't lawful to put anybody to death, right? They didn't have that power because they were under Roman law. They were under that Roman occupation, so they couldn't put anybody to death. And they wanted him to say, no, you shouldn't give to Caesar. That's what they wanted him to say, because then they could go say to the Romans, hey, he's saying that we shouldn't give tribute to Caesar, put him to death, right? They were just trying to catch him in his words. And so they were saying, basically, is it right? Is it wrong? And it's obviously not, because in Matthew 17 he gave tribute. So it obviously isn't wrong, and he's throwing it back in their face. He's giving them a little bit of a hard saying there. But so in the end, should you pay taxes? Yeah, lest we should offend them, lest we have to deal with the government and the IRS and all that stuff. But is it right? No, it's not. It's not right. It's theft. The government is stealing from you every single week. Every single time you get a paycheck, that's them stealing money from you. And so it's not right, it is theft, and it's bondage. But the children of Israel went through 430 years in Egypt, 400 years of hard affliction. And listen, we're not going to live for 400 years, okay? I don't want to break it to your heart here, but 70 years, maybe 80, nowadays you can live a little longer. But in the end, we don't have that much time here, so let's just do what we got to do. Let's not offend them, let their money perish with them. This isn't our home. We're just pilgrims and strangers, and we need to have that mindset. And so, and this ultra-patriotic, God bless America, listen, maybe back in 1900, maybe back in the late 1800s, before you had all the wickedness that's going on right now. But nowadays, it's just it's a cesspool. We're in bondage. And so are we the best country in the world? Probably. But man, that's like, what are you comparing that to? You know what I mean? It's like we've gone that far to where we're just like comparing it to these other countries that are just horrible countries and be like, well, we're better than them. It's like, well, thank God. But anyway, let's end with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this evening, and pray that you be with us throughout the rest of this week. And Lord, we thank you for your word. We just pray that you'd help us to always stay in that mindset of having our mind on things that are in heaven, things that are eternal, and not being attached to the things of this life. And Lord, we just thank you for everything that you give us, especially eternal life. And Lord, we love you and pray all this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.